How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ayin Zayin, Daf 77 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, today we begin the 8th chapter of Masechta Menachos. Very exciting. There is a lot of numbers, particularly on the first Amud of today's Daf. I wouldn't necessarily say that much math per se, maybe math, but like a lot of numbers. There's going to be a lot of relative measurements. How many kavs in a saw, how many saw in an ephah, how many isaruns in an ephah, what about a core, all these things and how different there's going to be relative numbers, and so there's going to be a lot of that on the first Amud. I made a chart just to map out the relative numbers that I hope will make it easier just to be able to, not have to hold so much in our heads, to be able to just, have it written out for us in a chart that we can reference. So I hope that should make things much more manageable. Anyway, so the first part of today's daf discusses the loaves of a korbin todah. Of course, as we know very well by now, there are 40 loaves. We're going to be talking about how much flour is in those loaves, how many flour is in each individual loaf, chametz loaves, matzah loaves. Anyways, that is kind of the vibe of the first Amud of today's daf and the first really Mishnah of the parak. And then on Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Beis, we learn a new Mishnah, also similar, talking about the terumah of the loaves of the korbin todah. Of course, there are, as we know from a million times, there are 40 loaves in a korbin todah, 4 types of breads, loaves, whatever, 10 of each type. 1 of each type goes to the kohen. We will be discussing how we know that, and ultimately how we really know that there's one, how much flour goes into each loaf, big adult, in general. Anyways, that's today's daf. I guess you could say it's a bit technical, but it's also a bit good too. Anyway, so come along with me. I think we'll have a great time learning Daf Ayin Zayin of Masechta Menachos. Friends, our daf begins on Daf Ayin Vav Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom, at the new Mishnah, at the new parak. HaTodah is above Chomesh Sayin Yerushalmios Shein Sheish Midbarios. Do. Bam ba-da-da-da. I knew we were going to get here at some point. This comes up from time to time. I think it came up more in the beginning of Babble on Talmud. It came up in Eruvin. Maybe also, I don't know, like around there it came up. Maybe Shabbos it came up. Like these Sa'a Midbarios, Sa'a Yerushalmios, Sa'a Tziporis. I knew that we were going to get to this sugya and that it was going to be tricky. I spent quite a while working with it yesterday, but I think I spent a lot of time crunching lots of numbers yesterday on Shabbos, and ultimately in the end, I don't think it's quite as tricky or mathematical as I thought it would be. It could be that it's going to come up more. It could be that this isn't the last we've seen it. But anyways, okay, friends, 5. Okay, so we said that. So we just said that the breads, that all the loaves of the korbin todah are 5 Yerushalmi sa'as and 6 midbari sa'as. Technically, we could just blow through this Mishnah, honestly, but I figured let's not blow through the Mishnah and let's actually understand it, because it is, I think, understandable. So let's try to understand it. So okay. So there's the korbin todah. The korbin todah, of course, we know has all these breads. How do we know how many breads there are? That we're going to learn about in Amud Beis. Let's just work with what we know. There's 40 breads, okay? 10 of them are chametz, 30 of them are matzah. Now, how much flour goes into these breads? So a total of 5 sa'a Yerushalmis, and 5 sa'a Yerushalmis is 6 sa'a midbaris. What does that mean? What that means, be'etzem, is, so I was thinking about it kind of similar, like a dollar, for example. There's US dollars, there's Canadian dollars, there's Australian dollars, there must be lots of other dollars. They're all called dollars, but they aren't all the same, right? I'm going to assume, I haven't looked this up I may be right, I may be wrong, it doesn't matter. For as far as we're concerned at Babylon Talmud, the US dollar is stronger than the Canadian dollar. They're both called dollars, but let's say a sandwich that might cost you $5 because you're paying with Canadian dollars and the Canadian dollar is weaker than the US dollar, you're going to have to pay 6 Canadian dollars. Okay? So basically the equivalent of $5 would be 6 Canadian dollars. So now we have these sa'as, okay? The sa'a Yerushalmi is a larger measure than the sa'a midbari, and therefore we're saying that that all the 40 loaves of the lachmei todah, if you're measuring with Yerushalmi sa'as, it's going to be 5 Yerushalmi sa'as. If you're going to be measuring with midbari sa'as, it is going to be 6 midbari sa'as because they are smaller sa'as. They're both sa'as, but they are the Yerushalmi is a bigger sa'a and the midbari is a smaller sa'a. Now, friends, a sa'a is 6 kav. A kav is 4 loaves. All of those are the same whether you're talking about a sa'a midbari or whether you're talking about a sa'a Yerushalmi. Similar to I don't know if this is true or not. I'm going to assume it is true. A dollar is 100 cents. I know it's definitely true in the United States. I don't know if it's true in Canada and Australia. I'm going to assume it is. Whether it is or isn't, whatever, I don't know, but I'm going to assume it is. So, in the United States, $1 is 100 cents. In Canada, $1 is 100 cents. But those 100 cents mean something different, whether you're in the United States or Canada, based on the strength or weakness of the currency. Therefore, what I'm saying is also when it comes to use our analogy, when it comes to sa'as, a sa'a, whether you're talking about a sa'a midbari or a sa'a Yerushalmi, a sa'a is still going to be 6 kavs. Now, the kavs are going to be relative, right? So we're talking about 6 Yerushalmi kavs versus 6 midbari kavs, whatever. But the point is that one sa'a is going to be 6 kavs, whether you are talking about Yerushalmi kavs or midbari kavs. Each kav is going to be 4 loaves, etc. This is going to be relevant later on. Okay, fine. Now, so a todah aisa ba chamesh sa'id. So the breads of a todah were 5 sa'a Yerushalmios, okay? Shehein sheish midbarios, which are 6 sa'a midbarios. Okay, now we are going to be discussing the sa'a midbarios. Now, 6 sa'a midbarios, what exactly is that? So let's take a look at this chart. I made this chart over here with relative measurements. Now, in case anybody is not familiar with tables, the columns in a table, or just need a refresher, the columns in a table are the vertical columns, and the rows are horizontal, right to left. So if you look at each of the columns, so the first column says 1 sa'a, the next column says 1 ephah / bas, and the third column says 1 kor / chomer. And the rows are basically how many of each measurement go into that measurement. We'll get there in a second. Also, I only included the numbers that were relevant for us, that to try to make this as bare bones as possible, and only giving what we need to work with. So, for example, in the first column, it says 1 sa'a, and that is 6 kavs, or 1 ephah is 10 isarons, or 3 sa'a. Now, why is this important? Because we're saying, so again, we're focusing on the midbaris now. We'll get back to the Yerushalmis later. So we're saying that the lachmei todah were 6 sa'a midbaris. So as you can see in our chart, on the second column, the 1 ephah / bath column, so if you go down to the third row where it says sa'a, so there's 3 sa'a for each ephah, which means that 6 sa'a that we're talking about are 2 ephahs, right? 3 sa'as is 1 ephah. 6 sa'as are 2 ephahs. Now, if you go to the second row for the ephah, the isaron row, there are 10 isarons per ephah. So again, so 3 sa'a is 1 ephah. 6 sa'a is 2 ephahs. Each ephah is 10 isarons. 2 ephahs are 20 isarons. Okay, great. And therefore, what are we saying? So we're saying, so now that we've kind of broken it down into isarons, which is what we can work with, because all menachos we talk about isarons, right? By default, a minchas nedava is 1 isaron, right? Or maybe it could be 2 isarons or 3 isarons. So we're saying that all of the lachme todah are 20 isarons. Okay, now I'm going to go further and say that in terms of the lachme todah, there are 10 chametz breads and there are 30 matzah breads, 30 unleavened breads. So half of the 20 isarons, 10 isarons, were dedicated to the chametz breads. The chametz breads, the chametz loaves were 10 isarons, 1 isaron per loaf, and the other 30 matzah loaves were 10 isarons for the remaining 10 isarons were for the 30 matzahs, which means that each matzah loaf was a third of an isaron. Okay, that's basically all the numbers that we need to know for now. We are good to move forward. So, again, todah, isa, ba'a, chamesh, sa'in, Yerushalmios. All of the loaves of the korbin todah were 5 Yerushalmi sa'as, shehed, sheish midbarios, which would be 6 midbarios sa'as, because those are smaller sa'as. Now, each sa'a is, so let's go back to shtei ephos, ha'efa shalosh sa'in, right? Every 3 sa'a is 1 ephah. We're saying 6 sa'as, so therefore, right, 3 sa'as per ephah, which means it's shtei ephos, right? So 2 ephahs, ha'efa shalosh sa'in, because since each ephah is 3 sa'as, so 6 sa'a is 2 ephahs. And each ephah is 10 isarons, 2 ephahs are 20 isarons, so esrin isaron, we're talking about a total of 20 isarons for all of these loaves. Now, asara lechametz, 10, right, half of the isarons, half of the flour was for just the 10 chametz loaves, which means that the other half of the flour, the remaining 10 isarons, were for the 30 matzah loaves. So asara lechametz, 10 isarons for the chametz loaves, va'asara lematzah, and the remaining 10 isarons were for all of the matzah loaves. Asara lechametz. So when we say that there are 10 isarons for the chametz loaves and there are 10 chametz loaves, that comes out to isaron lechala, so 1 isaron of flour per each of the chametz loaves. Now va'asara lematzah, there were 10 remaining isarons for all of the matzah loaves, uvimatzah shalosh minin, and as we know, by the matzahs for a korbin todah, there were 3 types: chalos, rikikin, virevucha. Those are the 3 types. Right, like by minchas, maifet, soner, there are the chalos, there are the rikikin, and now we're also talking about the revucha, which I believe was also by the minchas chavitin, which we haven't actually talked about how that is actually prepared. I think that we're going to talk about it soon. I think it involves like boiling water or something. Okay, so nimtzu shlosha esronim. So, right, vishlish l'chol min vamin. So if we have 10 remaining isarons for the 3 types of matzahs, so 10 divided by 3 is 3 1/3. So each matzah type had 3 1/3 isarons, and there were 10 loaves for each type. So each type was a third of each loaf for each type was a third of an isaron. The shalosh chalos leisaron, 3 loaves per isaron, i.e., each loaf was a third of an isaron. Now, okay, zel. So that was the midbari calculations, right? There were 6 sa'a midbarios, and 6 sa'a is 2 ephahs. 2 ephahs is 20 isarons. Divide that in half, and etc. Now we're going to do the calculations based on the Yerushalmis, right? The Yerushalmis were 5 sa'a, and as I mentioned earlier, all of the relative amounts are the same, right? Just like there's 100 cents that go into US dollar and 100 cents that go into Canadian dollar, even though they have different values, but the sort of the building blocks are the same. So also the building block, even though we're talking about 5 sa'a Yerushalmis, which are the equivalent of 6 sa'a midbaris, but still the building blocks are the same, meaning that it is 6 kav per saw, right? That still remains the same, and therefore, if we're looking at the chart again, okay, in the first column, the sa'a column, so 1 sa'a is 6 kavs, okay, and if we're saying that they were 5 Yerushalmi sa'a, so then that means that if we're going based on Yerushalmi sa'as, so there were 5 sa'as, each sa'a is 6 kavs times 5 sa is 30 kavs. And just like we had said earlier, half of all of the flour is for the chametz loaves and the other half is for all of the matzah loaves. Well, based on that, if we're talking about 30 kavs, half of that, 15 kavs, are for the chametz loaves, and there were 10 of those, so 15 divided by 10 is 1.5. Each chametz loaf was therefore 1.5 kavs when we're talking about Yerushalmi, and the 30, there were 15 kavs left for the remaining 30 loaves, which means that each matzah loaf was half of a kav. Again, when we are talking about the Yerushalmi measurements. So back in the Gemara, Uvmida Yerushalmis, when we're talking about the Yerushalmi measurements, hayu Shloshim kav, right? 5 sa'as, 6 kav per sa'a, 6 times 5 is 30 kavs. Chamisha also l'chametz, 15 kavs for the chametz, v'chamisha also l'matzah, and the other 15 kavs for all of the matzah loaves. Chamisha also l'chametz, kav v'mechza l'chala, 15 kavs for the chametz loaves, 1.5 kavs per chametz loaf. Chamisha asar lematzah, and 15 kavs for all of the matzahs of matzah shalosh minin. There were 3 types of matzahs: chalus, v'rikikin, v'revucha. Nimtzu chameshes kabin l'chomin vamin, which means that 15 kavs for 3 types of matzahs. So each type, there were 5 kavs for each type, and there were 10 loaves for each type, which means that every 2 loaves was 1 kav. V'shtei chalos l'kav, every 2 loaves was 1 kav, and each loaf therefore was half a kav. Okay, givaldig. That was all of the math, numbers, whatever you want to call it. Although we aren't done. We're going to be working with numbers really for the rest of the Amud, and even for the rest of the Daf in some ways. Just drinking a little bit of tea. My cough hasn't yet gone away. I'm hoping it will go away eventually. Says the Gemara, todah oisa ba chamesh sayin Yerushalmius. We said that the todah was 5, right, the breads of the todah were 5 sa Yerushalmius and 6 sa midbaris. And it's the 6 sa midbaris that we're really going to be working with now. How do we know this? Amr of Chizda says of Chizda Domer Kro that the pasuk says in Sefer Yechezkel, ha'efa vehabas. Right, if you notice in the chart, in the second column, it says 1 efa / bas. If you're wondering why I included the bas, it's for this. That the pasuk in Yechezkel says that an efa and a bas are the same. Ha'efa v'abas tochen echad yiyeh, they are the same measurement. Ma bas shalosh sayin, just like a bas is 3 sa'a. Af efa shalosh sayin. So an efa is also 3 sa'a, and therefore do the math. 6 sa'a is therefore 2 efas, 20 saruns, etc. Uvaz gufa minolan. How do we know that a bas is 3 sa'as? If you're going to tell me, because it says, the pasuk says, Laseis Meiser HaChomer, I think it's Meiser HaChomer, right? Yeah, Laseis Meiser HaChomer Habas. Okay, if you're going to tell me, because that same pasuk says that a bas is a tenth of a chomer, well, Eifa Nami Oksib, but Hasiris HaChomer Eifa. Well, in that same pasuk also, it says that an Eifa is also a tenth of a chomer. El Chomer le'yadayna kama. I don't know how much a chomer is. How much is a chomer? So Chanami lo yadayna kama. So I don't know how much a chomer is. I don't know how much it is for a bas. I don't know how much it is for an efa. So I know that an efa and a bas are the same. I know that they're both a tenth of a chomer. But how much is a chomer, and how does that help me? So Ella me'acha, rather from here, the pasuk also says a few psukim later in Sefer Yechezkel, the chok hashemen. When it came to the oil, habas hashemen Meiser habas min akor, that the bas, which is the same thing as an efa, is a tenth of a kor. A bas is a tenth of a kor. Okay. Aseres habatim chomer, and 10 bas is also a chomer. So meaning a bas is a tenth of a kor. It's also a tenth of a chomer, which means that a chomer and a kor are the same. Chomer because that every 10 bas is a chomer. Okay, so what do we know? We know, and we know enough now. We know that a bas and an ephah are the same. We know that there are 10 ephahs / bases in a chomer. We also know that there are 10 ephah / bases in a kor. And good news is, we know how much a kor is. That's a standard amount. We know, says Rashi, that a kor is 30 sa'ah. Okay, so if we look back on our chart, so if we go to the third column, 1 kor / chomer is 30 sa'ah. Now, 30 sa'ah, right? One ephah is 3 sa'ah, okay? Which means that 30 sa'ah is 10 ephahs. And therefore what? And therefore we know that there are 10 bas / ephahs in a kor. A kor is 30 sa'ah, i.e. an ephah, is 30 sa'ah, and therefore we know if a sa'ah is 30 kor, and we know that a ephah is 10 kor, so now we know the relative amounts between an ephah and a sa'ah, it's 1/3. So now if we're saying that there are 6 sa'ah in the todah, well then that means that there are basically 3 sa'ah per ephah, right? Because we know the relative amounts, that 30 sa'ah is 10 ephah, 3 sa'ah is 1 ephah, and therefore that means that 6 sa'ah for the todah is essentially 2 ephahs, 20 isarons, etc. So basically, once we know the relative amount, once we know that we can connect the sa'ahs and the ephahs to the kors, we can find the relative amounts between them to know that 3 sa'ah is 1 ephah and 6 sa'ah is therefore 2 ephahs, isarons, etc. Sheesh. Okay, that was a little bit tricky, but okay, we got all of the numbers that we needed. Amr Shmuel says, Ein mosifin ala midos yosem ishtos. We don't add on to measurements more than 1/6. Okay, v'lala matbeya yosem ishtos, and not on money, currency, more than a 1/6. And also when it comes to ona'ah, when it comes to a store owner, he should not be charging more than a 1/6 for his wares. My time. How come when it comes to measures, we don't increase the measures more than a 1/6? Well, so if it's because I'm getting the impression here, I don't know if I'm right. My impression is maybe you can have a situation where like people would go to the market with their own measures. Okay, so let's say you have a cup, and the cup and now the cup measure is increased to 1.2 cups. So every cup is now really 1.2 cups. So then the store owners are going to be increasing their prices, right? All of a sudden, a cup is more expensive than it was because it's also larger. But then once, as we know, once prices go up, that's it. They just keep on going up, right? And then people get nervous why the price is going up. Maybe there's a famine, then they go up and up and up, right? And then the things kind of snowball. So if we want to avoid the snowball, but nami. Right, but if so, then even including it by a 1/6 would also can get the snowball effect, right? The price, it's still increasing the price, and by increasing the price, they can keep on going up. So why does a 1/6 make any difference? Rather because of ona'ah. That basically, let's say you have a guy go to the wheat monger. And he says, I want a kilo of wheat. And the buyer, this is how I'm understanding it. It seems like a little weird to me. Why is the buyer taking out? But maybe that's how they did it. Maybe you could bring your own measure. I don't know. But the buyer takes out his kilo measuring cup or whatever, and gives it and says to the wheat monger, hey, scoop me up a kilo of wheat. And the wheat monger obliges, and he scoops up a what what the wheat monger thinks is a kilo of wheat, but the truth is it's actually 1.2 kilos of wheat. And now the buyer goes home. Now, if he increased the measure by more than a sixth, made it more than 1.2 kilos, well then, you see the halacha when it comes to ona'ah is that ona'ah within a sixth up or down is acceptable, right? Whether it's the seller charging, right, marking up by up to a sixth more, or whether selling it for up to a sixth lower than its actual value, that's completely, everything stands when it comes to that amount. So, for example, as we learned in Masechta Babble Metzia in Perek Hazov, that a seller can mark up his wares up to 1/6 above, and that's his profit. So now, in our case, if the buyer's measure is more than a sixth larger than a kilo, well then, so 1 second. So we said within a sixth, the sale stands. If it's exactly a sixth, so then the sale still stands, but the difference would have to be given back. The ona'ah would have to be given back. And if it deviates by more than a sixth, then the whole thing is batel. The whole transaction is null and void. So basically when the buyer comes and provides his kilo, which is really 1.2 kilos, well, at least the sale will still stand. At least the sale will still stand, and it will not be nullified, since if it's more than a sixth, the sale would be nullified. But we don't want the sales to be nullified, so we allow the buyer to increase his measure by a sixth, and he would have to, if it's exactly a sixth, he would have to return the difference, but the sale would still stand. Right? So that the transaction would not be null and void. But that won't work, because Rava says, anything that's measured, v'sheba mishkal, or weighed, v'sheba minyan, or counted, even if it's within the sixth, the transaction is null and void. Meaning, if the seller thinks that he is selling 1 kilo, and it turns out that he just sold more, right, 1.2 kilos, that's not okay. Even if it was 1.1 kilos, it doesn't matter. If the seller thinks that he's selling 1 kilo, if he sold a different amount than what he thought he was selling, the transaction is voided. Where do we talk about ona'ah that within a sixth it's okay? When we talk about a perceived value, right? For example, if I go to the store and I buy a bowl, okay, I go to the store and I buy a glass bowl, right? And the glass bowl, I don't know, costs, let's use just an easy example, like 60 shekels, okay? So the glass bowl costs 60 shekels. So, I mean, who's to say, okay, fine. So the owner says it costs 60 shekels. Now, if the glass bowl really costs 30 shekels and they're charging me double, so then that would be ona'ah, and the whole thing would be voided, right? Because how am I supposed to? It's not right. How am I supposed to know? Now, if I said, I want to buy 5 bowls and they sold me 6 bowls, or 4 bowls or 6 bowls or whatever, or even if I wanted to buy 100 bowls and they sold me 99 bowls, then the whole thing is voided, because I gave a specific number and they gave me a different number than what we agreed upon. But when it comes to kind of assigning value to something, and they are saying that the bowl is 60 shekels when really it's 30 shekels, so that's where we're talking about no. But if they say it's 60 shekels and really it's worth 55 shekels and they're making 5 shekels profit, then that's completely fine. Okay. Now, so the thing is, it can't be the scenario where the buyer is coming with his 1.2 kilo measure, because if the seller thinks he's selling a kilo and he's not, well then the whole transaction is voided. So Ella Mishum Tagra, rather because of merchants. Now, I don't really understand this scenario, but Kiechi Delo Lamtie Pseida Delo Lamtie Ravchat Loboy Zavin Vizavin Tagra Ikre. This seems to be some kind of scenario where I think you have a supplier. You have a supplier, I think. And you would have a supplier who has all this grain, and merchants would come to him every day and pick up their supplies, whatever, and they would go around. So let's say wheat, okay? So let's say you had somebody, right, Shimon. Shimon's job was he would go to Reuven the supplier every morning, and he would pick up a whole bunch of wheat from Reuven the supplier. And then Shimon would go around to different markets, towns, whatever it is, and he would sell the wheat at a markup of up to a sixth, and that would be his profit. Now, if Reuven the buyer, if Reuven the supplier is somehow messing with the measures, I don't exactly understand how, but maybe he's making them smaller, I don't know. But if he's messing with the measures, basically, and what's ended up happening is because he messed with the measures, Shimon is basically not making a profit anymore, because his whole business model was that he would, whatever he would get from Reuven, he would be selling at a markup of up to a sixth. But now if Reuven is messing with how much he's giving Shimon by more than a sixth, well then Shimon is going to be losing money now. But if Reuven messes with the measures up to a sixth, so at least Shimon isn't losing money anymore. To which the Gemara says, but so what that Shimon isn't losing money? He's not in this business to just have fun and not lose money. He's in the business to make a profit. So therefore, it's not okay that Reuven's going to mess with the measures, and just as long as it's not more than a sixth, so then Shimon won't lose money. No, Shimon's here to make money, and therefore it would not be okay if Reuven's messing with the measures, but it's okay because Shimon's not losing money, he's breaking even, but Shimon's not working to break even, he's working to make a profit. Okay, so again, Elam Shum Tagra, because of the merchants, Shimon, ki eichi delo lamtie pseida, said he doesn't lose money. Pseida hu delo lamtie ravchol obai, but what? We're just concerned that Shimon shouldn't lose money. What about his profit? Zabin Tagra Ikre, what is he just selling and selling? Just that he could say, look at me, I'm a salesman, and he's not making any profit. No, he needs to make profit. Okay, I didn't fully understand that example exactly what the mechanics of how it works, but anyways, Amr of Chizda says of Chizda, Shmuel Kra Ashkach V'Darsh. Look, at the end of the day, we tried all sorts of different scenarios, we asked all sorts of questions, but at the end of the day, Shmuel is darshaning a pasuk. The pasuk says also in Yechezkel, in that same area of Yechezkel, within those few psukim that we were quoting earlier, Hashekel Esrim Gera, that the shekel is 20 geras. Esrim Shkalim, 20 Shkalim, Chamisha ve'esrim Shkalim, plus 25 Shkalim, 20 and 25 is 45, Asara, plus another 10 is 55, V'chamisha, and another 5 is 60 shekel, Hamana. 60 shekels was one mana. Now, when we usually talk about a mana, in the Gemara, that is 100 zuzes. 100 zuz. Now it's fours. Now a zuz and a dinar are the same. A shekel and a selah are the same. So now when we talk about a mana, we're usually talking about 100 zuz. Now it's 4 zuz to a shekel / selah. Let's talk about shekels now, since that's what we're talking about. So it's 4 zuz per shekel. So normally when we talk about a mana, which is 100 zuz, and it's 4 zuz per shekel, so that's 25 shekels. Here we're talking about the pasuk in Yechezkel is saying that the mana was 60 shekels, not 25 shekels, 60 shekels. Okay. So shekel amana yelchem. Mana masan v'arboim havu, and therefore, if we're saying that the mana was 60 shekels, that's 240 zuz. El shmamina plus, we learned 3 things from here. Shmamina mana shel kodesh kafalaya. We learn that the mana of kodesh was actually twice the amount that we usually talk about. We usually talk about 100 zuz. The mana of kodesh was 200 zuz. Okay, so now we're not talking about the difference between 100 and 240. We're talking about the difference between 200 and 240, which is a sixth, right? Meaning 200 divided by 5 is 40. When you add that to 200, that's 240. That 40 is now a sixth of the result, right? 240 divided by 6 is 40. So okay, Shmamina mosifin al amidos ve'mosifin al yosef mishtos. So we can add on to the amounts as long as it is within a sixth. Vishmamina shtusa milavar, that when we're talking about a sixth, we're talking about a sixth of the result rather than a sixth of the initial amount. Okay, it's a fifth of the initial amount. So when we had we started with 200 to 240. So when we talk about a sixth, it's a sixth of the result. The result being 240. How much did we add on? 40, right? We started with 200. We ended up with the result was 240. We added on 40. 40 is a sixth of the result of 240 rather than a sixth of 200. It's a fifth of 200. Okay, did I cover all the bases? I think I did. Okay, and that right, so that the mana of kodesh is 200, and that we can add up to a sixth, and that the sixth is from the result rather than from the base amount. Could also infer from our Mishnah, the Katani Hatoda Isa Ba Chamish Sain Yerushalmios Shein Sheish Midbarios Shmamina. And you can also infer this from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah talked about the todah, which is 5 Sa'ah Yerushalmis and 6 Sa'ah Midbaris, meaning we have this measure of a sixth, which initially we have this measure of a Sa'ah, which initially in the Midbar, in the wilderness, was a Sa'ah Midbari. But then in Yerushalayim, they increased it to a Sa'ah Yerushalmi. They made the Sa'ah bigger, such that now it's, 5 Sa'ahs Yerushalmis are the equivalent of 6 Sa'ah Midbaris. So meaning, if you have 5 Sa'ah Yerushalmis, and then you take 5 Sa'ah Midbaris, how much would you have to increase to the Sa'ah Midbaris to get a Sa'ah Yerushalmi? Well, it's from 5 to 6. So that's basically a fifth of 5. You add it, you get to 6. So the one that you added is a sixth of the total of 6. So we see from our Mishnah as well, with the relative measures with the Sa'ah Midbari and the Sa'ah Yerushalmi, that they increased the Sa'ah Midbari to arrive at a Sa'ah Yerushalmi that was a sixth larger. Sheesh. Okay, there was a lot of technical stuff on that first Amud of Daf Ayin Zayin of Masechta Menachos, but okay, we got through it. Yeah, it was pretty technical, but we did get through it. Now we are going to move on to a new Mishnah here on Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Beis. Okay, so now we get to this Mishnah on Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Beis, where we discuss the Meiser of the chalas of the todah, that there were, of course, 40 loaves, which we're going to talk about how we know b'chlal that there were 40 loaves. We haven't really talked, in the previous Mishnah we said that the lachmei todah are 5 Sa'ah Yerushalmis, 6 Sa'ah Midbaris. How do we know that? Where do we get that from? So we're going to be learning about that, about how actually we know that here, starting with the terumah, that we know that the 40 loaves, we've talked about this before, that the 40 loaves of the todah were of 4 types, 10 loaves per type. One of each type, 4 total loaves, would go to the priests. That was a type of terumah that would go to the priests from the 40 loaves of the lachmi todah. And then the owner of the todah would get the remaining 36 loaves, and he would have one day to eat 36 loaves of bread. Woo! Okay, wow. It's a lot of matzah. Okay. Says the Mishnah, Mikulam oya notel echad me asara truma, and 1 out of every 10 was basically 4 total loaves were given to the kohen as truma. Shenemar vehikriv mimenu echad mikol korbin truma Hashem, that 1 of each korbin, 1 of each type of the breads, were given to the kohen as a type of truma. Echad shlo yitol parus, as we learned either yesterday or the day before, that when it says echad, it means you can't have any shtiklach, you can't have any pieces, you have to give a whole bread. Mikol korbin sheyuhu kol akorbanis shavas, that all of the korbanis need to be equal. Shelo yitol mikorbin al chavero, that you can't, you can't say, I want more of the chametz breads. Let me just give all matzah breads. No, you have to have 1 loaf from each type of loaf. Lakoin azorik dam ashlom loyeh b'ashar nechol valim, and the 4 loaves go to the priests, and the remaining 36 go to the owner. Okay, you will offer the truma from it, meaning you have to gather all of the breads together and then separate one, and separate the truma from all of them gathered together. Echad, when it says 1, shelo yitel parus, you shouldn't give a piece of a bread, rather a whole bread, mikol korbin, from each type of loaf, sheyu kol akorbonis shavas, that they all have to be equal, one loaf per type. Shalo yito min akorbin al chavero, don't separate more matzahs or more chametzes or whatever, one bread from each of the type. Nice and clean and easy. Truma la Hashem, it's a truma for God. Any odea mikama he. How much? How much? I've been saying, of course, 1/10. How do we know 1/10? Hareni done. Well, let's get to work. Nemer kan trume, nemer betrumas meiser trume. Well, it says trume by the lachme todah, and it says trume by trumas meiser. What's trumas meiser? Meiser, of course, is 10% of the crop goes to the Levi. Levi then takes 1/10 of what he receives and gives that to the priest, and that's what's called trumas meiser, and it's mamish truma. Meaning any zar that eats it is chayv misu b'dei shamayim, etc. So malaholon echad me'asara, afkan echad me'asar. Just like by trumas meiser, we're talking about 1/10. So here also by the loaves, we're talking about 1/10, and I think that's basically how we know that we're talking about 40 loaves. I think. Well, I don't think it says anywhere 40 loaves. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think it says anywhere 40 loaves. We see in the psukim that there are 4 types of loaves. That's for sure. Right? One pasuk says that it's chalas, rikikin, and revuchas, and the next pasuk says that there's also chametz. So we see that there's 4 types of loaves. We don't know how many of each, but we do know that you're going to have to separate truma from each, and the truma is 1 of 10. So therefore, there are 10 of each type. One of them goes to the kohen. So we know that there are 40 breads. Wait a second. Or maybe we could say that it says trume by the lachme todah, and it also says trume by bikurim. When the pasuk says that you'll come to Yerushalayim and you'll eat trumas yodcha, the pasuk says trumas yodcha elu bikurim. That's a reference to bikurim. So bikurim is also referred to as truma. And as we know, friends, when we say birkas haTorah every morning, right? When we wake up, or every night, depending on when you wake up, when you say birkas haTorah, elu dvarim she'ein lehem shiur. These are the things that have no amount. Hapeya, that bikurim. Bikurim has no amount. Malaholin ein lo shiur. Just like bikurim, there's no official amount. Afkan ein lo shiur. So here also by the trume of the lachme todah, maybe there's also no specific amount. Now, we did say that it can't be less than 1, so I don't really know what that other specific amount would be. But anyways, okay, maybe there's no amount. Fine. Nir lemidoma. Well, let's see what it's similar to. Is lachme todah more similar to trumas meiser, or is it more similar to bikurim? Done in trume she'en acharei trume, mitrume she'en acharei trume. We will judge trume she'en acharei trume. When it comes to the lachme todah, you separate truma and that's it. There's no more trumas that need to be separate. You separate 1 out of every 10 and azoi. And also by trumas meiser, the Levi gets the meiser, he takes a 10th, gives it to the kohen, that's it. Ve'al yochichu bikurim sheish acharei truma. But by the bikurim, it's the first fruits. You separate the first fruits, but you still have to separate trumas, meiseris, all that stuff. Or maybe I'll make the following argument: done in trume hanecheles b'makom kodesh, mitruma hanecheles b'makom kodesh. Well, the lachme todah are kachim kalim; they have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. They can't be eaten outside of Yerushalayim. The bikurim also need to be eaten in Yerushalayim. I think it might even need to be eaten in. So they need to be eaten in. I don't know if they need to be in the Azar. That I'm not sure about. But they wait. No, I think Yerushalayim. I think Yerushalayim. But I could be wrong. I haven't learned Masechta Bikurim yet. It's going to take a few years. I'm only going to get to it in a few years. But maybe I'll get the answer to this question sooner than that. But anyways, that. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Limud Torah. But consistency, as we know from Daf Yomi. Every day, a little more, over time, it adds up. Now, where are we? So, Mitruma v'necheles b'makom kodesh. So Bikurim has to be in Yerushalayim, and lachmei todah need to be in Yerushalayim, as opposed to trumas meiser to be in anywhere. Wherever you live, you separate meiser, you give it to Levi, and the Levi takes 10% and gives it to the Kohen. It has nothing to do with Yerushalayim. So trumas meiser shenecheles b'chol makom. Don't be learning the truma of the lachmei todah from trumas meiser. Truma lachmei todah needs to be in Yerushalayim. Trumas meiser could be anywhere. Yes, but it says by lachmei todah mimenu truma Hashem, and also by trumas meiser uchsib b'trumas meiser mimenu trumas Hashem. L'gzeira shaveh mimenu truma Hashem, mimenu trumas Hashem. For gzeira shaveh lamanu l'trume she'echad me'asorit. Okay, fine. So we learn out gzeira shaveh between lachmei todah and trumas meiser. So we see that the truma of the lachmei todah is 1/10 for each bread. Okay, fine. So lamanu the truma shei echad me'asara. Okay, so the truma is 1/10 for each bread, for each type. Aval eni yodea mikama hi chala. Okay, fine. So we have 4 types of loaves, 40 loaves total, 1/10, right? One bread for each type. How much flour is in each loaf? We had learned earlier, well, it's, 5 sah Yerushalmis, 6 sah midbaris, and let's say you take the 6 sah midbaris, so that's 2 ephahs, 20 isaron, divide it in half. How do we know that? How do we know that, Bichlal? How do we know that, Bichlal? Where does it say anywhere that we're talking about 6 sahs or whatever? So, Hareni don nemarkan lechem, well, it says by lachmei todah lechem, v'nemer lahalon, and it says by b'shtei lechem lechem. Malahalon isaron lechala, just like the shtei alechem, the 2 loaves are 2 isarons, 1 isaron per loaf. So afkan asara lechala. So here also isaron lechala. Here also by the lachmei todah, we're talking about 1 isaron per challah, per loaf. So at least the chametz one. We'll get back. We'll learn more about this as we move ahead. Or we can make the following argument: Nemar kan lechem v'nemar belechem aponim lechem. Wait, it says lechem by the lachmei todah. Specifically, we're referring to the chametz breads. It also says lechem by the lechem aponim. Malahalan shnei esronos av kan shnei esronos. The lechem aponim were 2 isarons per loaf. So maybe the lachmei todah, the chametz loaves, we're talking about 2 isarons per loaf. Nira lemidoma. Okay, well, let's see what it's more similar to. Is the lachmei todah more similar to the shtei alechem or more similar to the lechem aponim? Donin mincha ba chametz im azevach. Well, let's learn lachmei todah, which is a mincha that includes chametz. It has chametz breads, the lachmei todah, and it accompanies a sacrifice, an animal sacrifice. So let's learn out korbin lachmei todah from shtei alechem, which are also chametz, and also accompany the kivsei atzeres, and all sorts of other korbanos. And don't try to ask me kashas from lechem aponim she'eno ba chametz, which is not chametz. The lechem aponim, the showbreads are matzah, imazevach, and nor are they brought with a sacrifice. So therefore, it makes sense that we're going to learn out the lachmei todah from the shtei lechem rather than the lechem aponim. Okalecha derech zo. Wait a second. Then in mincha haba me'eretz v'chutz la'aretz. Let's learn lachmei todah, which can come from Eretz Yisrael, from Chutz La'aretz, makes no difference. Min hachadush, min hayashon, it can come from new grain, old grain, makes no difference. Mincha haba me'eretz v'chutz la'aretz, min hachadush, min hayashon, from lechem aponim, which also can come from Eretz Yisrael. Chutz La'aretz, doesn't matter, it could be old grain, new grain, makes no difference. Vayochichu shtei lechem, and don't try to bring me a raya from shtei lechem she'ein bos ela min hachadush, min haaretz. Shtei lechem has to come from the new grain, right? It's matir, the new grain in the Beis Hamikdash. It has to come from the new grain, and it has to come from Eretz Yisrael. So Tamalomer mimoshvosechem taviu lechem tnufa shtayim. That the pasuk by shtei lechem says mimoshvosechem, dwellings. Taviu, bring lechem tnufa shtaim. She'ein tam v'lomar taviu. It doesn't have to say taviu, because the very previous pasuk says ad mochos Shabbos Esriyas. I'm reading the pasuk. Tispu chavim shmam v'krabtem mincha chadash Hashem. It already says in mamish the pasuk before v'krabtem mincha chadash Hashem. So why does the very next pasuk need to say taviu lechem? We already said in the previous pasuk they're going to bring this korbin. Shein tam v'lomer taviu. It doesn't need to say taviu. Uma tam v'lomer taviu. Why does it say taviu? Shekol ma she'ata mevi mimakom acher, that any other korbin that's similar, that is chametz, that is brought with a animal sacrifice, hareyu kazeh, is going to be like the shtei lechem malahalon isaron chala. Therefore, just like by shtei lechem, it is one isaron per loaf. Afkan isaron chala. So also by the lechem, also by the lachmei todah, the chametz loaves are one isaron per loaf. Imal alon shnei esronos afkan shnei esronos. Wait, but 1 second. By the shtei alechem, it's a total of 2 isarons. Maybe by the lachmei todah, the chametz bread should be a total of 2 isarons, not 10 isarons. Tamlomer tihiyena. Therefore, it says tihiyena. At the very end of today's daf, we're going to explain what it means, but I'll say what it means anyways. Tihiyena has an extra yud. Why does it have an extra yud? Tihiyena has 2 yuds in it. Why the extra yud? The extra yud is, of course, gematria 10. So 10, what are we talking about? 10. Well, it can't be talking about 10 isaruns for the lachmei todah, for the shtei, right? Tien is by the shtei alechem. I hope I didn't say lachmei todah. Tien is by the shtei alechem. There's the extra yud. Yud is 10, representing 10 isaruns. Now, it can't be 10 isaruns for the shtei alechem, because the shtei alechem, the pasuk says, is 2 isaruns. So where is this? What is this 10 isaruns for? Well, it must be for the lachmei todah, which are chametz breads and also come with a korbin. So it must be that the 10 isarons are referring to the lachmei todah, that the 10 chametz loaves of the lachmei todah are 10 isarons, 1 isaron per loaf. Lamadnu asara lichametz. Okay, fine. So we see that 1 isaron per loaf for the chametz loaves of the lachmei todah, 10 isarons, 1 isaron per loaf. Asar the matzah mi 9. Okay, now how do we know that it's also 10 isarons for all the rest of the matzahs? How do we know it's a total of 20 isarons? So Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says al chalos lechem chametz. That the pasuk said, right, meaning the pasuk right before this al chalos lechem chametz talks about all of the. Where is this pasuk? Do I have it here? I don't. What's this? Yeah. The pasuk says, im al, this is the pasuk moving forward. The pasuk, Perek Zayin, pasuk Yud Beis in Vayikra says, im al todah yakrivenu, v'ikriv al zevach hatodah chalos matzos belulos b'shemen, rikike matzos meshuchim b'shemen, v'solos morbeches chalos belulos b'shemen. So those are the 3 types of matzah loaves. And then the very next pasuk says, al chalos lechem chametz yakriv korbanu. So neged chametz have a matzah, that we're kind of making a equivalency between the chametz and the matzah. Just like the chametz, we're talking about 10 isarons. So the matzahs, all those matzah loaves from the previous pasuk are the same 10 isarons. Nimtzu esrim esronos. So if we have 10 isarons for the matzah and 10 isarons for the chametz, so that is a total of 20 isarons. Esrim esronos lachmei todah for all the lachmei todah. Asar l'chametz 10 for the chametz. Vasar l'matzah 10 for the matzahs. Yochel asara shebematzah lo yu kulon el mimin echad. Now, when we're talking about the 10 isarons for the matzah, how do we know that that's for 30 loaves? Maybe it's just for 10 loaves. Maybe you just bring one type of matzahs, right? When it comes to the maifasana, for example, you could have chalas, you could have rikikim, but you choose one. And you bring 10 loaves of one of them, either chalas or rikikin. So maybe when it comes to lachmei todah, maybe you don't bring 30 matzahs, maybe you choose one, and you bring 10 of that type. So Talmud Lomar, im al todah yakrivenu, v'ikriv al zevach hatodah, chalos matzahs b'luz b'shemen, v'rikike matzahs meshuchim b'shemen, v'solos morbeches v'chulei, that the pasuk says that you bring all 3, and therefore you're going to bring 3 types times 10 breads, 30 breads, 10 isarons for the 30 loaves. Nimsu shlosha esronim V'shlish l'chol min v'min, so 3 1/3 isarons for each type of matzah. V'shalosh chalos l'isarun, which means 1/3 of an isaron per loaf. Every 3 loaves is 1 isarun. V'nimsu lachmei todah arbayim. So there you go. Now we have it. We have just learned that the lachmei todah, there are 40 of them, because we learned that, let's go weiter let's stop here for a second, just to check in. So we've learned that, the terumah for each of the 4 types of lachmei todah is 1/10, right? So therefore, there are 10 of each loaf, 40 loaves, right? And we said that, and we learned from the shtei alechem that each chametz loaf is 1 isaron, and there are 10 isarons we learned from the shtei alechem that there are 10 isarons for the chametz loaves, 1 isaron per loaf. We also learned that the same amount of isarons for the chametz are for all of the matzahs, so that's another 10 isarons, so for a total of 20 isarons. And we said, the pasuk says that you're going to bring each type of the matzahs, and we said that you're going to also separate terumah from each type, which is 1/10. So if you have 3 types, 10 types of each, so a total of 40, and also a total of 20 isarons, and 1 isaron per chametz loaf, 1/3 of isaron per matzah loaf. Noto men arba v'nosin l'kohen, 4 are given to the kohen bashar, and the remaining 36 nechon l'balim are enjoyed by the owner. I'm going to chap a shluck of tea, and we'll go weiter. Tea schlucked. Now let's go weiter. Amar, we said earlier, we said, and he will separate from it, from the lachmei todah, that you bring them all together. By the parhelim davar shel tzibor, the pasuk says that all of the chalev will be taken from it. What do you mean that over there also they're all brought together? So Kid Rav Chizda, it's like Rav Chizda, and it means that you shouldn't be cut by korbanis, you shouldn't be cutting up the meat and stuff before you separate the emurim. You first need to separate the emurim, only then do you start cutting up and separating the meat. But when you separate the emurim, all of the rest of the animal is still together. We said earlier, Nemar kan trume, the Nemar b'trumas meiser trume, that it says trume by the lachmei todah, and it says trume by trumas meiser. V'neilef mitrumas midjan. Why don't we learn it out from trumas midjan? What's trumas midjan? In Parshas Matos. The first aliyah of Parshas Matos talks all about nedarim. Okay, nice and cute. But then, right after the first aliyah in Parshas Matos, the Rebbeinu Shalom says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Nikom nikmas b'nei Yisrael me'eis HaMidyanim. Take the vengeance of the Israelites from the Midianites. Of course, at the end of Parshas Balak. Then the Parshas Balak, of course, Parshas Balak is all about Moab and Midian hiring Balak to wreak havoc on the Yidden, and of course it fails spectacularly, Baruch Hashem. Thank God, Baruch Hashem. Anyways, but in the end, Bilam suggested to them that they entice the Yidden with Baal Peor and with Kozbi Bas Tzur, the Midianite. And anyways, that created a big problem for the Yidden. So the Rebbeinu Shalom says in Parshas Matos, right? So that was at the end of Parshas Balak, and then there was, of course, Pinchas ben Elazar. Was it Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron? No, Pinchas, right? Pinchas ben Elazar. Was Pinchas the son of Elazar? He was, right? Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Yeah. Right? I feel like I should know this. I'm pretty sure it's Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Al kol panim, and then after that is Parshas Matos, and there the Rebbeinu Shalom says to Moshe Rabbeinu, venge the vengeance of the Yidden from the Midianites, and venge the vengeance they do. Big time venge. Mamish, all 5 kings of Midian, done. All of the men of Midian, done. All of the women of Midian initially were spared. Moshe Rabbeinu says, why'd you spare them? They're the ones who were sinning with the Yidden. Done. All of the children, the boys, done. all of the cattle and the donkeys and the sheep taken. So then we're talking about like hundreds of thousands of animals. The Torah Pasha talks about it, like 667,000, like, I don't know, donkeys or something. Like tons and tons of spoils. And then the Torah says, so the Torah had said in the fight with Midian that there were 1,000 soldiers per shevet. So 12,000 soldiers went to fight, and then they brought back these immense spoils. Half of the spoils went to the 12,000 soldiers, and the other half of the spoils were divided among the rest of Am Yisrael. And it says that the soldiers gave a terumah of 1/500th from all of their spoils, and the people gave a terumah of 1/50th from their spoils. So the question is, we were assuming that the terumah is 1/10, maybe it was 1/50th, or maybe even 1/500th, but maybe it's one of those other options from the terumah of Midian. Done in terumah anueges lidoris, mitrumah anueges lidoris. Yeah, but the lachmei todah is a terumah for all, a timeless terumah, as is the Trumas Meiser. Ve'al tochiach Trumas Midian she'ena noeges lidoris. Don't learn out from Trumas Midian because that was a one-time type of truma. V'nelef mitrumas chala. Okay, why don't we learn out from chala? Chala is timeless. That's 1/48th. Wow, that would be a lot of lachmei todah. 48 times 4. Well, 50 times 4 is 200 minus 4. That would be 196. Did I do the math right? No, I think I probably have to do -8, right? 192. That's a lot of breads, especially to eat in one day. Sheesh. So Tana Dvei Rabbi Shmuel Danan Dover Shenemar Bo Mimenu Trumas Hashem. It's actually backwards. Dover Shenemar Bo Truma La Hashem. As we said earlier, there's the Gezer Shava of Truma La Hashem, or Mimenu Truma La Hashem, and Mimenu Trumas Hashem. La Fuke Trumas Chala Delo Nemar Bo Mimenu Truma La Hashem. It doesn't say Mimenu Truma La Hashem by Chala. So rather we learn the truma of the lachmei todah from Trumas Meiser 1/10. Boy, Rava wants to know Trumas lachmei todah, the truma of the lachmei todah. Chayov nelen misa v'chomesh or in chayov nelen misa v'chomesh. When it comes to truma, usually if a person intentionally, if a zar eats truma intentionally, so the chayiv misa b'dei shemaim. Unintentionally, they have to pay it back plus a fifth. Does that apply to the truma of the lachmei todah? Or ein chayov nelen misa v'chomesh or not? Kevan de iskash l'trumas meiser k'trumas meiser dami. Since the truma of the lachmei todah is equated with the truma of trumas meiser, which is mamish truma, so this should also be treated like mamish truma. Or Dilmar, perhaps bo v'chamishi. So when it says misa b'dei shamayim umesu bo ki chalu, I think when it comes to truma, so maybe it says bo specifically truma, but not trumas lachmei todah. V'chamishiso, also when it talks about me'ila and it says you add a fifth, also v'chamishiso, it mi'et rachmana, and therefore it is excluding, right? The lachmei todah are excluded. Midamas or ena midamas. Additionally, truma, of course, when it falls into a mixture of chulin, there's meduma, right? It would need 100 parts chulin to 1 part truma to be batal. Does that apply to the lachmei todah as well? Teku, it's a tie. Omar Mar, we said earlier, Talmud Lomer Tihiyena, my Talmuda. Right, when we said Tihiyena by the Shtei Alechem, there's that extra yud, and the yud is for 10 isarons. The 10 isarons is not for the Shtei Alechem because that's only 2 isarons. So what's it for? It's for the lachmei todah, the chometz loaves of the lachmei todah. Rav Chizak, Rav Yitzchak Bar Abdimi Tihiyena Ksiv, because there's the extra yud, and therefore the 10 isarons for the lachmei todah, the chametz breads of the lachmei todah. Ema asar kapize. How do you know that means 10 isarons? Maybe it's 10 kapize. I think kapize. I don't remember. I think it's half a maybe, or maybe half a kav. I think it was. What does Rashi say? I think it's half a kav. Basically, I think what was Rashi? Kapize chatzai kabin. Yeah, a half a kav. Now, basically, I think I did the math. It comes out to 1 isaron is 3.6 of these kapizis. But anyways, maybe that's what we're talking about. Kapizis, maybe it's 1 kapizi rather 1 isaron. I guess that's 1 divide. It's, I don't know. I guess 1 divided by 3.6 is what we need. Anyways, maybe it's that. Amurava says, yeah, but the pasuk is talking about esronim, right? It says shtei esronim. It's talking about isarons, so therefore it's talking about isarons. Lamanu asara lechometz, asara lematzah minayin. Okay, so we learned about 10 chametz breads, right? This is referring to earlier that, okay, so we need 10 isarons for the chametz, asar lematzah minayin. How do we know 10 isarons for the matzah loaves as well? Talmud Omer al chalos lechem chametz keneged chametz have matzah. We had said, well, just like there are 10 loaves for the chametz, there's also going to be 10 isarons for the chametz. There's also 10 isarons for the matzah. But one second, we only know 10 isarons by the chametz loaves because essentially there was this tihiyena and it was extra, and it's teaching about the chametz of the lachmei todah. So the 10 esronim by the chametz of lachmei todah is itself learned out from shtei alechem. Can it now be taught to now teach about the matzah of the lachmei todah? Well, yeah, but it's different. It's not exactly the same thing. Meaning, the chametz breads of the lachmei todah are 1 isaron per bread. Now it's teaching about the chametz loaves, just that it is 10 isarons total for all 30 matzahs, but it's 1/3 of an isaron per bread. So it's a little bit different. So it's not like it's taking what it learned from the other place and applying it now to a third place. Rather, it's teaching kind of a new limud to the third place. And when you have learning up from one place, but then applying something else to the third place, that is not an issue of something that's from a hekesh now teaching to another place of a hekesh. That, okay, that's all fine and good. If we say that himenu v'davar acher is not considered davar lamed bekesh chozum lamed bekesh, fine. But if you say that it is an issue of davar lamed bekesh chozum lamed bekesh, Michael lemema taviu ribuyahu. Okay, fine. But as we said earlier, that the word taviu is entirely extra, right? That because in the previous pasuk it had already said, the previous that pasuk I already said, you're going to bring a mincha. So why do I need the next pasuk to say aviu? So what it means, taviu, so the word taviu is entirely extra, and therefore what it's doing is it's entirely extra to say, you know what, it doesn't belong here. It belongs somewhere else. It belongs by the chametz loaves of the lachmei todah. That to say that it's as though it's mamish written, just like it's written by the shtei alechem, this extra yud, to refer to 10 esronim. And we said the 10 esronim are not for the shtei alechem because shtei alechem is 2 isarons. So what's it talking about? It's talking about the chametz breads of the lachmei todah. And that extra word of taviu doesn't belong there. It belongs by the lachmei. It's as if it belongs by the lachmei todah to make it as if it's mamish written by the chametz breads of the lachmei todah that they are 10 isarons. So it's not that it's being learned out from the shtei alechem. It's as if it's mamish written and implanted by the chametz breads of the lachmei todah, that it's as though it's written that they are 10 isarons. And therefore, since it's as far as we're concerned, it's written mamish by the chametz breads of the lachmei todah that they are 10 isarons, we can now learn out to the matzahs that they're also 10 isarons, and it's not something that was learned out from a different place, it's something that's written mamish by the chametz breads of the lachmei todah, and therefore it could from there teach that it's also 10 isarons for the chametz loaves of the lachmei todah. Friends, that was Daf Ayin Zayin of Masechta Menachos. All right, I guess that was not exactly the easiest daf, but okay, we got through it. We learned some important things though on this daf. We learned about the loaves of a korbin todah, right? The first Amud, we learned the first Mishnah in Perek. What's this Perek called? Todah Haisabah. That's our new Perek. Perek 8 of Masechta Menachos. Perek Todah Haisabah. In the first Mishnah, we learned about the loaves of a korbin todah. In terms of the chametz loaves, they are 10 loaves, 1 isaron each if we're talking about midbari loaves, and 1.5 kavs each if we're talking about Yerushalmi measures. And in terms of the matzah loaves, we're talking about 30 loaves, a third of Yisar in each if we're talking about Midbari measures, and 0.5 kavs each if we're talking about Yerushalmi measures. And the terumah of the korbin todah loaves, well, we said that terumah is 1 out of 10, which therefore means that there were 10 loaves per each type. We know the pasuk already talks about, the Torah talks about the four types, and you're separating terumah from each one. The terumah is 1/10, which means that there are 10 of each type, 40 in total. 4 are given to the Kohanim. The remaining 36 are enjoyed by the lucky owner. Friends, that was Daf Ayin Zayin, Daf 77 of Masechta Menachos. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Cheers.